So today's gardening topic is seed starting seeds for your cool season crops. So we're approaching the end of summer, and even though it's still really hot outside, now like late August or late July, early August is a good time to start planting your cool season garden. So some cool season crops that do good in Oklahoma are things like leafy greens, cabbage, lettuce, kale, spinach. Also root vegetables like carrots, onions, beets, radishes. There's also good winter squashes like spaghetti squash, butternut squash, even some pumpkins if you start them early enough. And there's even bean varieties that do good well in the wintertime. If you want to take a break from gardening, I would recommend using a cover crop in the cooler months. A cover crop is just going to help keep your soil from eroding and blowing away, and it can also add nutrition to your soil. Some good cover crops in Oklahoma are things like winter wheat or winter rye. There's also clover, crimson clover. Really good summer or winter cover crop. There's also legumes that you can buy, different types of beans. They're not really the traditional beans that we think of, but they still add nitrogen and nutrients to your soil like all the other beans. If your soil is really compacted and you want to help break it up, something like turnips, parsnips, rutabagas, those are great for soil compaction. So timing is crucial. Whenever you're planting your cool season crops, you want to make sure you have enough time for your seeds to reach maturity and to reach harvest before the first frost happens. The average first frost in Oklahoma usually occurs during the first or second week in November. That's when temperatures really start to drop and we start to see more frequent frosts. Most of these cool season crops are going to be a little bit frost hardy, but as the frosts happen more frequently, their production is going to go down and their quality is going to go down. So you just want to get what you can before it starts getting too cold. So things like leafy greens mature pretty fast. Those take about 40 or 50 days to mature. Your root vegetables like your carrots and your onions, those can take 100+ days to mature. So you want to just make sure you plan in time to harvest something. Whenever you sow your seeds in late July or early August, that's going to give you about 90 to 100 days before the first frost. So you should have plenty of time to harvest something before it gets too cold outside. So once you've chosen your seeds, you want to make sure you start your cool season crops indoors. You don't want to start them outside in the heat just because they're going to probably dry out really fast, and we really need a lot of moisture for our seeds. You also want to choose a good soil. Any kind of soil that promotes moisture control or moisture regulation, I would not use that for your seeds, just because it's probably going to have a lot of this white rock called perlite. This is great for drainage. This is great for airflow. This is good for like mature plants with an extensive root system. This isn't the most ideal for seedlings just because we want them to stay moist all the time. We don't want them to dry out. So you want to choose a grow medium that doesn't have a lot of perlite. This one has some, but not a lot. There's some blends that are like 50% perlite, 30% perlite. Those are probably a little too much for your seeds. So just a general rule of thumb with seeds, I always tell people to plant their seeds twice as deep as the size. That's just going to make sure your seed is getting proper airflow and darkness for germination. So you can see the difference in these seeds. This squash seed, I would plant it deep into the soil, whereas these kale seeds, they're really tiny. I would plant those really, really shallow. So a squash seed, we would bury it pretty deep, whereas these kale seeds, I would probably barely even cover them, just like that. I also recommend planting in trays instead of in individual pots. This is just gonna help with uniformity, and it's also gonna make it easier to transplant outside. So very important, you wanna make sure you keep your seeds moist at all times. You don't wanna let them dry out completely because moisture is essential for germination, for seed germination. If you let your seeds dry out too hard after planting them, it could hinder their germination or just stop their germination altogether. I have had people ask about starting seeds in paper towels. I think that technique is great. It's just kind of difficult to keep your paper towel moist all the time because it dries out so fast. And then when you're moving your seeds from paper towel to soil, you just have to do it very, very, very carefully because they're so sensitive at that point in their life. So once your seeds have germinated or they begin sprouting, the first leaves that emerge aren't actually leaves. So you'll see these little round leaves come out. On things like grasses, like corn and stuff, they look a little different, but on most plants, they're usually these little round leaves like this. These are actually called cotyledons. These are storage organs that were inside of the seed. So these aren't really leaves, and these aren't what the leaves on your plant are gonna look like. So you can see on this squash, these two big round leaves are the cotyledons, or the storage organ, and you can see this one come out. This is the true leaf, the first true leaf. This is what all the leaves on the squash are gonna look like. You can see another one starting to come out right here. Whenever I transplant, I like to make sure there's at least 2 or 3 sets of these true leaves. You don't want to transplant when there's just cotyledons like this because the plant is still really, really young and immature. So once your seedlings are ready to move outside, you can watch episode 1 of the Mvskoke Gardening series. We kind of go over transplanting and give you some tips for that. I will add to that for your cool season crops, it's a good idea to add manure like this to your soil. This is just gonna help keep them warm in the cooler months. Also mulch, so like this red mulch we have down here, manure plus a thick layer of mulch is gonna help keep your crops cool, or keep your crops warm in those cooler months. One season I added mulch to my beds and manure. Literally had snow cover my flowers, and when the snow melted and the ice went away, my flowers were still alive and colorful under the snow. So mulch and manure is a game changer for your cool season garden. I would also recommend maybe just throwing in some tulip bulbs here and there in between your cool season crops, and that's just going to give you a nice little colorful surprise in the springtime.
Yate Apene, good morning. My name is Brandon Gibson. I am a botanist for Tribal Alliance for Pollinators and Uchi Butterfly Farm. And today we're at the College of the Muscogee Creek Nation, and we're highlighting sort of our pollinator garden that we've been planting here and maintaining here. And so we have a whole different variety of plants here in just a small section. And so what I want to emphasize is that this is not a large tract of land, this is not acres and such, but it does provide a very valuable source of nectar and host plants for all the butterflies and the bees. Right now we're seeing some sweat bees using this tobacco plant, which is not technically a native, but it is also used for a lot of different cultural and medicinal reasons. And so it's also a great benefactor for a lot of hummingbirds. I see hummingbirds going crazy all over this. Same thing with a lot of the long-tongued bees and the butterflies, because they're the ones that really can access the actual nectar. So the nectar is actually going to be in the back of the flower there, and so you need a nice long tongue to be able to reach all the way in the back there. What's interesting, this morning I even saw it, is that sometimes leafcutter bees will actually cheat the system, and so they don't have long tongues that can reach all the way into the back. So what they do instead is they come right up here, they use their powerful mandibles, and then they cut into the flower. And so if you ever see a flower like that, you can assume that it's a nice long cutter bee there. And so we're going to kind of look at a couple different plants here. Let's just look at the stuff that's blooming. And this is really one of my favorite plants. I'm an ornithologist before I became a botanist, and so I love birds, and so this is what I plant to attract hummingbirds. because of that red color. You know, anytime you put up a hummingbird feeder, you always notice it's going to be red or yellow or white. That has to do with the amount of rods and cones in a hummingbird's eyes. They have a much denser concentration than us, and so they see the spectrum of colors way differently than we do. And so red and white and that yellow really pops out to them. And so this is going to be my hummingbird attractor. Butterflies and bees obviously use it. And what's really nice about this, you were kind of talking about seeds. This is a fantastic plant for collecting seeds because you really only need one plant, and then you're basically going to have cardinal flower seeds for life, because we can kind of see if we can find a ripe one here. And so all of these flowers are going to have individual seed capsules like this right here. And this one's not mature right now, but we'll go ahead and pop it off just so we can look at the insides here. And so all of these little white sort of yellowy dots there, those are all seeds there. And so off of just one capsule here, there's, you know, a few hundred seeds in there. And so as long as you can get one of these things going, you can keep these generations going on for quite some time. And this specific plant requires sunlight to germinate. And so what we're going to do with this plant is we're basically just going to let all the seeds fall to the ground, and this will become back up thicker and thicker and thicker. You know, with native plants, you really kind of want it to be really bushy and full. If you go out to the prairie, like just across the fence there, you'll notice that there's not a lot of room. Everything's kind of smushed together, and so denser is always going to be better when we're talking about native plants. For agricultural reasons, obviously you want more spacing and such, but with native plants we can really shove them in there. And so that's why I'm a big fan of a lot of dense plantings around here. And so let's look at this one right here, actually, just right behind me. This is another one of my favorites here. This is rattlesnake master, Eryngium yuccifolium. And Eryngium yuccifolium gets its name because it kind of looks like a yucca on the bottom of the actual base of the plant. It's not related to yucca, it just evolutionarily happens to have some sort of convergence there. But I really like this plant a lot. It's a pretty good pollinator plant. I won't say it's the end-all be-all of all pollinator plants, but it does attract a lot of wasps, bees. I see butterflies using this, ladybugs like to hang out on it, and I see a good amount of jumping spiders on there. And so spiders are not, I know some people might think spiders are scary, but they're a very important part of the ecosystem, essentially what we're trying to cultivate here. So we're involved in the food web, we're not exclusive from it, and so we need some natural predators to get rid of a lot of those pests. And so this is a fantastic sort of predator plant for a lot of spiders to hang out on. And let's just go ahead and look at this. We got a skipper right now using the cup plant. This is Silphium perfoliatum. One of my favorites. It's not technically a true sunflower, and so a true sunflower would be all of the Helianthus species. This is very closely evolutionarily related to it. It's in the same subfamily in the tribe as true sunflowers, but it's not a true sunflower. That being said, it's a magnificent plant, and this thing next year, I'm really excited to see what happens next season, because the one I have on our farm is probably about 8 to 10 feet tall right now and has multiple blooms, and it's the most popular plant on the farm by far right now. And so this thing's going to be awesome to see next season. Really thick stem, and the name cup plant comes from this little feature here. And so Silphium perfoliatum. Perfoliatum is the Latin term for perfoliate. And so perfoliate in botany terms means that the leaf goes all the way around the stem. And so when this thing gets larger, it's going to form an actual cup here. And so that holds water really, really well. So after a rain, you'll oftentimes see birds actually drinking out of that little cup there. And so I really like this plant. It's not only for, you know, just nectar resources, but it also holds water. So this is sort of a natural living bird feeder. And the butterflies obviously love it. We've seen 5 skippers just since I've been sitting here nectaring on this. And then let's see what else we got blooming here. Oh, right behind me. It's kind of heading out of bloom right now, but these beautiful purple flowers here, this is called blue vervain, Verbina hastata. This is one of our core plants that we grow at the farm every single year because of how easy it is to establish, how many seeds these will produce. And so one of these little spikes here, this is going to be probably about 500 to 1,000 seeds right here. People always ask me, you know, can we get a native ground cover going? And I always recommend this plant here. This is called frog fruit, Phylla nodiflora. These tiny little yellow or white flowers. And what's really interesting about them is that it might look pretty insignificant, but you can kind of see all the tiny sweat bees that we're seeing flying around right now. Those are the ones that are going to be pollinating this plant and utilizing it. And so what's really important in a native plant garden is to have a multitude of different sizes of flowers. So morphologically, these tiny little sweat bees can't necessarily utilize something like a cup plant that we were just looking at. But since these flowers are a lot tinier and the nectar resource is a lot smaller and more adaptable to their size, that's what we see going on around here. And so this is a whole living ecosystem, and this would be something that you could easily walk past, no problem, out in the field. But if you really stop and look at it, you can see just the magnitude of life that this frog fruit is supporting. And I really like this plant because of how resilient it is too. I just had some volunteers from the college come to the farm a couple weeks ago, and we transplanted a lot of this because this right here might look a little scraggly right now, but I guarantee you, if we took this and we put it in a cup of water like that, change the water every 24 hours, and in about a week, this will have nice, fully fledged white roots, and you can plant that in your garden. And that's exactly what we did at the college. And so with this one, I'm actually just going to put this back in here, and this thing will get watered later on, and I guarantee you that thing will root again. This is one of the most resilient plants that I've ever worked with. We have a nice native grass here. This looks to be Tripsicum dactyloides, eastern gamma grass. This is one of my favorite grasses here in Oklahoma. It's really high in crude protein content. Buffalo and cows, they will find this grass on a prairie and they will go after this. I've seen it firsthand. Even stuff with like big blue stem, Indian grass, panicum, the switch grasses. I've seen bison go through a field and find every single one of these grasses before they even go to the big blue stem and Indian grass. And so this is one of my favorites. It's very closely related to corn. And so when this thing blooms next season, it's going to have these real big fat seeds that look basically like corn kernels. Birds love it. I like it a lot. And you know, a lot of our native grasses here and why they're so important here in Oklahoma is that they're a lot different than your lawn grasses. And so we think about lawns and having Bermuda where it takes up every single square inch of soil. But with our native grasses here in Oklahoma, they're called bunch grasses. And so they grow exactly like you would imagine, like a bunch like this. And so having these two next to each other, what's nice is that this will obviously be a lot fleshed out, a lot more fleshed out next season. But what we're going to see is that we're going to create a little corridor between these two grasses. And so what that allows on the native system is that birds and mammals and everything, they use this as a highway system. So all these bunch grasses basically create a highway system out in a true prairie system. And so our native grasses are very, very, very important. But right next to it, we also have a great medicinal plant that I'm sure a lot of people know. This is called bee balm. Monarda fistulosa, also called wild bergamot. There's a whole multitude of common names for it. It's a mint family, and it has a very good aroma to it. There's a lot of oils all over these leaves, and so those oils are sort of what comprise a lot of the medicinal aspects. A lot of our modern medicine today comes originally from native plants, such as this wild bergamot, or a Echinacea purpurea or pallida, or things like that. And so historically, tribes were already using this plant for a lot of coughs and, you know, sore throats and things like that. And so nowadays that we know with modern science that they were totally on the right path. This thing has a ton of medicinal properties to it, as well as being a fantastic pollinator plant. This one probably won't bloom this season because, again, we planted it just like a month ago. But what we're really worried about is that root system. This is a perennial plant, and so it's going to come back every single year. And it produces thousands of seeds just off of one individual. And so this will get thicker and thicker and thicker as we go out throughout the years. And it's going to be a really nice plant. It blooms pink. You know, I'm using a lot of scientific terms and things like that with the terms of the names. We do that specifically because it helps us relate different species to other species. And so different families, you know, basically what I'm trying to get at is that learning some of the Latin terminology can really help you give you context for what this plant is, how it got here evolutionarily, such as, just even touching this plant right now, you can see that the stem is actually square. So it's not a round stem, it's a square stem. And if we look at the leaves itself, we'll notice that all of the leaves on the stem come opposite of each other. So this is leaf phyllotaxy, is the fancy word for the way that the leaves actually branch out on the main stem. So every single point on this plant, the leaves, the stems are coming off opposite of each other. And so no matter where you're at in the world, if you're in Asia, Australia, Europe, Africa, if you see a plant with a square stem and opposite leaves like this, you can go ahead and infer that it's part of the Lamiaceae family, the mint family. And so learning these botanical characteristics really helps you a lot, and it helps you identify plants a lot quicker whenever you're out in an area where you're not familiar with.
Mado for watching today's gardening series episode. You can come visit our garden on campus at the College of the Muscogee Nation every Thursday from 11 to 12.